Estamos em live.
Bom dia, boa tarde, boa noite a todos e a todos que estão envolvidos aqui no nosso Seminário Internacional Vygotsky e Marx, com o professor Peter Jones. Esse projeto é um projeto que objetiva promover o Seminário Internacional, que discute os conceitos-chave de Marx e Vygotsky por meio de um diálogo com o professor doutor, parceiro internacional Peter Jones, da Sheffield Hallam University, da Inglaterra. E esse evento ele é financiado pelo Projeto de Internacionalização, PIPRINT da PUC São Paulo, sob a organização da nossa querida professora Maria Cecília Camargo Magalhães, Cissa, Peter Jones, da Sheffield Hallam University, Fernanda Coelho Liberali, também da PUC, Ângela Lessa, da PUC, Maria Wanda Junqueira, a nossa IA, da PUC São Paulo, Sueli Salles Figal, da Unifesp, eu, Adolfo Tanzineto, da UFRJ, e Viviane Carrijo, do GP LACE. Então, a gente dá as boas-vindas ao Peter Jones para esse quarto encontro. Lembrando que nós temos mais um encontro somente para finalizar essa sequência do Seminário Internacional. Será no dia 8/12, então coloquem aí no calendário de vocês o nosso último encontro sobre essa discussão. Quem precisar de tradução, é só clicar, e aí se eu errar aqui as instruções, a Vivi me ajuda. Vocês clicam aqui no botão de interpretação, quem precisar de interpretação de Libras e de línguas, a gente tem as duas opções, de língua inglesa para português. Acho que é isso que eu tenho que falar, né, minha parte mais formal, então sejam bem-vindos e bem-vindas. Peter Jones, the stage is yours, and thank you again to be with us, Brazilians, sharing your knowledge and sharing your experience with us, because for us it is a pleasure to have you here. Me as a newbie, as a young researcher, as a person that read your papers when I was an undergraduate student, and went for my master's and my doctorate under the influence of your papers and your thoughts and your ideals and perspective of Vygotsky theory. So for me, it's even more important to be here and to be with you all. So thank you, and the stage is yours.
Just one thing, I think that it is December the 1st, it's not the 8th. I don't know, the next meeting.
Vivi.
Is in the second Thursday. The second Thursday of month.
Fala, Vivi, não ouvi.
It is in the second Thursday.
Tá bom, então the 8th. Melhor.
It's the 8th, yes, 8th of December, our last...
the 8th.
Yes,
melhor.
our last gathering.
Ótimo.
Dear colleagues and friends, Adolfo, thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. It's fantastic to be with you all again in these post-Bolsonaro days. What a thrill, how fantastic. And congratulations to you all for this great victory. If only we could have something similar in the UK. Anyway, that's going to be some time in coming, I think. Friends, I'll just see if I can share my screen and get to my slides if I can. Let's see if that's there. There's screen. Let's have a look. No, can't see anything there. Just let me close a few windows. Close a few of my windows. I can't see anything there. And then come back to it. Apologies. Just give me 1 sec. Close that. Here we go. Okay. Friends, can you see that okay? Is that okay? Is that good? Okay. Right. So session 4, and the topic we've selected today is Vygotsky's general genetic law of cultural development. So after a number of sessions where we've been looking in perhaps rather an abstract way at the relationship between Vygotsky and Marx, and specifically the extent to which it's possible to compare Vygotsky's evolving methodology and methodological choices with Marx. And we've also been considering the extent to which there may be an ethnocentric, Eurocentric bias in Marx's work, indeed, and also in Vygotsky's work. Questions that we'll come back to, I'm sure. I thought, excuse me, in this session, we could focus more directly on what is arguably Vygotsky's most remarkable achievement in terms of the development of his overall project, namely this general genetic law, which was formulated around 1930, 1931, and I think which could be reasonably taken to be the most serious and significant bid to advance a system of psychological principles along Marxian lines. So I thought we could have a look at the law itself, the background and context for it, consider some of its terms and implications, and also begin to think how we might evaluate it, to consider whether we think there are problems with it. Now, of course, Vygotsky moved on from this work in 1931, so that when we look at the formulation of the law and Vygotsky's general discussion of it, we see that there is little specific reference to, for example, meaning or word meaning in this law itself, although Vygotsky did have an approach to that at the time, which was then later further elaborated, particularly in the work for thinking and speech and the later works as well. So this law is by no means the final achievement of Vygotsky. It's not his final word on his psychological work, far from it. And so next time, I think we'll need to consider the later developments, particularly in relation to meaning, sense, and переживание in the later work, and what the relationship is between that later work and the genetic law. So that's what I thought we could do. We'll have a look at the law, we'll talk about it, have some initial reflection on it perhaps, and then I thought we could look in a bit more detail at some of the basic supporting arguments or evidence for the genetic law, and see what you make of it. So the law itself is formulated very clearly in what is or was an unpublished manuscript at the time, which is translated into English as the history of the development of higher psychological functions. Actually, it did appear in 1931 originally in a monograph, but the complete work to which it belongs was only published later, and it appears in the 4th volume of the collected works. Now, according to most scholars, in particular Van der Veer and Valsiner, Vygotsky and Luria together wrote several accounts of the basic principles of their cultural historical theory. First was published in 1928, and it was called The Problem of the Cultural Development of the Child. But the fuller statement of it does appear in the History of the Development of the higher psychological functions, and the genetic law specifically appears there. So let's have a look at it. So this is what Vygotsky says in this is chapter 5 of the history of the development of higher psychological functions. We can formulate the general genetic law of cultural development as follows. Every function in the cultural development of the child appears on the stage twice, in 2 planes. First, the social, then the psychological. First, between people as an intermental category, then within the child as an intramental category. This pertains equally to voluntary attention, to logical memory, to the formation of concepts, and to the development of will. We're justified in considering the thesis presented as a law, but it is understood that the transition from outside inward transforms the process itself, changes its structures and functions. Genetically, social relations, real relations of people, stand behind all the higher functions and their relations. From this, one of the basic principles of our will is the principle of division of functions among people. The division into 2 of what's now merged into 1, the experimental unfolding of a higher mental process into the drama that occurs among people. The English translation is poor, by the way, and occasionally I'll draw attention to some problems with it. There are certainly problems with this translation, but let's leave it for the moment. And you'll notice that in the last sentence, Vygotsky talks about the drama unfolding, and these dramatic or theatrical turns of phrase or metaphors have been of particular interest to Nikolai Verisov, as you know, and I recommended one of his articles for today as well, because he has his own very interesting interpretation of Vygotsky's law and Vygotsky's overall approach in taking seriously those theatrical metaphors, and you may well be interested in looking at his intriguing interpretation of that. So the law, I think, is perhaps the most ambitious attempt to answer the question of what a Marxist psychology would look like. It's a very striking and compelling synthesis of the most important aspects and orientations of Vygotsky's thinking up to that point about the problem of human consciousness, about the problem of humanness. And it's the key general principle, is the key formulation, I think, and conception of the connection between the ideas that Vygotsky had been developing up to that point from his early writings from 1924 on. And is certainly, you can see, and as we've discussed before, I think you can see key aspects of that conception of the law in his earlier works, when he was actually still very committed to a reflexological account. So these concepts that come together, the natural, the cultural, stimulus, reaction, signs, speech, internalization, control, mastery of behavior, the social, that's the external, and the individual, and so on. All of these are articulated and integrated in particular ways in the formulation and in the interpretation of the law. In terms of Marxism, we'll see the appeal to Marx that Vygotsky makes in the formulation and discussion of the law, as well as an appeal to Hegel for a particular concrete account of how the law manifests itself in particular in the development of particular cultural forms of behavior. And in fact, Vygotsky makes it clear that this applies to all forms of higher or cultural forms of behavior, with language itself, with speech development itself, as both an instance and an exemplary model for cultural forms and their developmental course. But of course, his approach to language and speech needs also to be taken into account, and the more detailed account of all that is in Thinking and Speech, the later published work. Although there is one chapter wholly devoted to the language development in this particular work of the history of the higher development of the higher psychological functions, which I won't really talk about today. So we can see clearly with the formulation of the law that Vygotsky is directly appealing to both Marx and Hegel in terms of its the shape of the argument, the support for the argument, the philosophy behind the argument, if you like, and the logic and methodology with which it's formulated and pursued. So with all of that, this is very clearly a serious contender for a Marxist psychological principle, at least. And there are other things that are involved with it, I think. Because of Vygotsky's focus on signs, as we'll see, signs as the key to cultural development, then Vygotsky needs to do more, and he understands that he needs to do more than simply talk about the role of signs in human development. He has to also explain the origin of signs within human cultural life. And so, as part of this overall framework, or rather architecture of concepts around the law, there is also an account of what Vygotsky calls the natural history of the sign. Note the parallel with Marx's natural history of society. There is a natural history of the sign, which is exemplified and outlined through a particular analysis of the pointing gesture. And that, therefore, that analysis of pointing has enormous significance for his overall theory, and indeed for any assessment we want to make of it. So that, I think, means that this law is extremely important and significant for us and for our deliberations in this particular seminar series. Now, what problem is the law seeking to solve? Why this formulation? Essentially, we've got the problem, as Vygotsky sees it, of the relationship between natural or lower and higher cultural forms of behavior and thinking. More specifically, how the natural functions, which are reactive, how they are transformed into the cultural, the active functions of humans in both the history of humanity and in the history of each individual person through childhood. How do beings whose powers are natural, reflex-based, reactive, how do they cultivate themselves, as it were, to become active, to become free agents through the development of cultural forms of behavioral control and regulation? Similarly, given the primitive naturalness, reactivity of the newborn child's behavioral and psychological capacities, how does one explain the development of the child as a culturally active being, as a personality endowed with these cultural higher forms of behavior and cognitive capacity, able to act independently, voluntarily, consciously, and with forethought. That's the problem, though, or the twin problems that Vygotsky is aiming to solve with this law. Now, clearly, the law is based on certain basic presuppositions and preparatory conditions intellectually. There's a particular perspective, first of all, of the social and the relationship between social relations, social interaction, and individual behavior and thinking. As Vygotsky says, culture is both a product of social life and of the social activity of man, and for this reason, the very formulation of the problem of cultural development of behavior already leads us directly to the social plane of development. He says further, we could indicate the fact that the sign found outside of the organism, like a tool, is separated from the individual at first and serves essentially as a social organ or social means. So the sociality that he's looking at then is first of all the thing that binds us all together. But at the social level then, the signs are there in that social plane, serving for particular communicational and organizational purposes in the social whole. Going further, he says we might say that all higher functions were formed not in biology, not in the history of pure phylogenesis, but that the mechanism itself that is the basis of higher mental functions is a copy from the social. Now, the terms in Vygotsky, like copy, are also a cast or a mold of the social, and that is an interesting metaphor as well, I think. I won't dwell on it now, but as he says, all higher mental functions are the essence of internalized relations of a social order, a basis for the social structure of the individual. Now, there are issues with that, as we'll see, but nevertheless, that is the general conception of the social, which Vygotsky gives as the preparatory context, if you like, for the formulation of this law. There's also a cautious or qualified appeal to Marx, changing the well-known thesis of Marx, he says. We could say that the mental nature of man represents the totality of social relations internalized and made into functions of the individual and forms of his structure. We do not want to say that this is specifically the meaning of the thesis of Marx, but we see in this thesis the most complete expression of everything to which our history of cultural development leads. So, as I said, there's an appeal to Marx on this. Whether we think that that is what Marx meant or is aligned specifically with a Marxian view, that's another issue. But we can see then that Vygotsky's articulation of this law and his argumentation in support of the law make this wider appeal to the Marxist tradition. What are the theoretical assumptions that specifically that Vygotsky is articulating for the formulation of the law? Here, of course, this is very complex and complicated, so I've tried to put down what I think are the key moments of this. The genetic law, in effect, is built on what Vygotsky calls a new regulatory principle of behavior. And the possibility for this new principle, he explains as follows. Social life creates the need to subject the behavior of the individual to social requirements. And together with this, creates complex signalization systems, means of communication, that guide and regulate the development of conditioned connections in the brain of each person. The organization of higher nervous activity creates the necessary prerequisites, creates the possibility of external regulation of behavior. And where external regulation of behavior, in this case, refers to the role of signs. Okay, so it's worth bearing that description of social life in mind, I think, in terms of how, in particular, it's articulated. Let's explore this in a little bit more detail. So, first of all, Vygotsky is developing his new conception of sign, of the sign, which will fit with this view, with this new perspective, in a dialogue with Pavlov's work. In particular, he's going to contrast his new notion of sign with a Pavlovian notion of signal. The most general basis of behavior, identical in man and animals, is signalization, Pavlov said. So the basic and most general activity of the cerebral hemispheres is signaling with an infinite number of signals and with changeable signalization. The translation is awful there. As is known, he says, this is the most general formulation of the whole idea of conditioned reflexes that lies at the base of the physiology of the higher nervous activity. But, he says, human behavior is distinguished exactly in that it creates artificial signaling stimuli, primarily the grandiose signalization of speech. There the translation is poor, the English translation, because the Russian says the grandiose signalistics of speech, and that's Pavlov's own term. And in this way, masters the signaling activity of the cerebral hemispheres. If the basic and most general activity of the cerebral hemispheres in animals and in man is signalization, then the basic and most general activity of man that differentiates man from animals in the first place, from the psychological aspect, is signification. That is creation and use of signs. Okay, so signification there doesn't mean meaning as such. It's not a synonym for some semantic thing. Signification means the creation and use of signs. And he stresses this terminological shift, and in a particular way. He says we're using this word signification in its most literal sense and precise meaning. Signification is the creation and use of signs. That is artificial signals. Now, in other words, signal is Pavlov's term. Signification is Vygotsky's term, but notice that signification means the creation of artificial signals. And his overall definition then of a sign is we call artificial stimuli devices, which is, again, the terminology that Vygotsky uses, introduced by man into a psychological situation where they fulfill the function of auto-stimulation. We call these things signs. Every conditioned stimulus created artificially by man that is a means of mastering behavior, that of another or one's own, is a sign. Okay, so you can see how he's taken the Pavlovian conception of signalization and transcended that with a concept of sign, which is an artificial signal, which is created and used for particular purposes. So from that point of view, this also leads him to project a new conception of the relationship between the key terms of the reflexological approach, that's to say stimulus, response, or reaction. Animals and humans both have a foundation of signalization. But what's the difference? Well, he says the line dividing the two forms. Sorry, let me read the first bit first. What does he say? He says that the development of the psychological dividing lines between animal, human, natural, cultural, lower, higher, is viewed, as he puts it, in terms of a dialectical leap that leads to a qualitative change in the relation itself between the stimulus and the reaction. So that's what he's putting forward here. The notion of a sign and cultural development involves this dialectical leap, which involves a change in the relationship between stimulus and reaction, or stimulus and response. The line, this is how he explains it, the line dividing the two forms, that's to say lower and higher, cultural and natural, is the relation of stimulus response. For one form, that's the lower form, the animal form, an essential characteristic shall be a full determinacy of behavior by the stimulus. Full determination of behavior by the stimulus. For the other, the same essential characteristic, he says, is auto-stimulation. That's the creation and use of artificial stimuli devices or stimuli means. And determining one's own behavior with the help of these artificial devices. Creating and using artificial stimuli as auxiliary devices for controlling one's own reactions also serves as a basis for the new form of determinative behavior that distinguishes higher from elementary. So the presence of created stimuli, together with the given stimuli, the natural ones, seems to be the distinguishing characteristic of human psychology. Okay, and this idea is elaborated constantly in different forms throughout this work, throughout this book. He says, we know that the basic law of behavior is the law of stimulus response. For this reason, we cannot master our behavior in any other way except through appropriate stimulation. The key to mastery of behavior is a mastery of stimuli. Thus, mastery of behavior is a mediated process that's always accomplished through certain auxiliary stimuli. And those are the signs. Now, this basic conception, according to which signs are used as auxiliary stimuli to provoke, to cause, to determine our own behavior, is illustrated many times in the work. And Vygotsky takes examples from so-called ethnic psychology, dealing with the so-called psychology of primitive peoples, but is also supported by cases we are familiar with ourselves, possibly, of sign use in the behavior of cultural adults. And I'll just show you one such example, which is fairly typical of the argument. This is taken from chapter 12 of the same book, the chapter called Self-Control. Vygotsky is looking at what he calls a typical developed voluntary act, so a higher sort of cultural form of behavior. And he says it exhibits the following three instances. Number one, so he's imagining a case. You know, you've got to get up in the morning. You don't want to get up. You've got to make yourself get up somehow. You know you have to. So what happens? So number one, I must get up. That is a particular motive. But there is an opposite motive of apparently equal strength. I don't want to get up. Okay. So there is also, number three, counting to oneself. 1, 2, 3. That's what he calls the auxiliary motive. Here's where the auxiliary stimuli come into play. and 4 at the count of 3, rising, getting up. So in other words, he says, this is the introduction then of an auxiliary motive, creating a situation from within that makes me get up. So in other words, I'm there in my bed, I don't want to get up, but I say to myself, on the count of 3, I'm gonna get up, and I go 1, 2, 3, yes, and I'm there. Okay, that's the basic idea. So, as he says, in the example of getting up, I got up at the signal 3, conditioned reflex, that's what he calls it. I controlled my behavior through an auxiliary stimulus or an auxiliary motive. So this is an ordinary everyday example, but it's looked at through this particular psychological discourse involving this idea of an auxiliary stimulus. I wonder what you make of that example, my friends. How many times has this happened to us? And of course, I think there are probably quite a few times when we said, right, I'm going to get up in 2 seconds or 3 seconds, 1, 2, 3, and unfortunately, it doesn't always work, does it? So I won't go any further than that. You can see this example and you can make of it what you will. But I think I'd have to say that in terms of the specific theoretical construct which Vygotsky is trying to support with this, the idea that words said aloud have in fact the power of the kinds of stimuli that the theory of conditioned reflexes talk about. Well, I don't think it's credible for an instant. No matter how we may look at this, I don't think it can be fitted into that box. Okay, I won't say any more on that. I'm sure you'll have your own views. But at this stage, before I look at the pointing example and the command example, let me just have an initial reflection on where we are with this. Because we might ask some questions already, I think, about this genetic law. In De Souza Santos's book, The End of the Cognitive Empire, he says that in Eurocentric social theory, Marxism excluded, the topic of social struggle and resistance has always been treated as a mere subtopic of the social question, the privileged focus being on social order rather than on social conflict. And he goes on to discuss the difficulties of Eurocentric critical sociology in this domain, in relation to Pierre Bourdieu in particular. Santos notes that the presence of structuralism and structures of domination was so strong that it ended up eliminating the very notion of subject or social actor. That's to say, the notion was so strong in European social theory. And this is something that Bourdieu sought to address with his theory of habitus. Nevertheless, he argues, Bourdieu, once he'd become active in political struggles, was forced to recognize a certain contradiction between his sociology and his political practice. It's an interesting comment, and in that light, I think we're justified in at least asking the question about this new regulatory principle of behavior that is enshrined in the genetic law. Is this a law of social transformation, of struggle, resistance, or is it a law of social order? Or is it both? Is it a law that lends itself to both of those? Is Vygotsky's new notion of signification adequate to the task of thinking about social transformation? How do reactive beings, subject to sign-based regulation and control of social systems, become active agents and subjects of personal and social transformation? And I know this is the question. This is the ultimate question for us, isn't it? How do we make sense of this? And in this context, I think it's also very valuable to refer to the 2019 article by Anna Stetsenko, where she takes the opportunity of a critical examination of the work of Biester to consider more expansively the contrast between social and psychological theories, which have response to conditions or responsiveness at the foundation of human social life and behavior. As time is getting on a little bit, I'll move on from her work, but I think it's very interesting, and she makes the point that if instead of having theories based on responsiveness, we have theories based on human transformative practice, humans are a self-creating species, producing their actual life and society through activities and practices of collective practice and behavior and labor. This notion of transformative collaborative praxis was advanced in Marxism and taken up, she says, in Vygotsky's school, though not consistently elaborated in any sufficient detail, against the naturalistic understanding that only nature affects human beings and that only natural conditions determine their historical development. So she's not referring to Vygotsky in that last sentence, but indeed she's trying to draw out from Vygotsky precisely what she needs for her own transformative activist stance. But as she concedes, this kind of perspective was not consistently elaborated in any sufficient detail in Vygotsky's school. And it may be that one of the issues there is to rethink, to re-look at this genetic law from that perspective. Let me then move on from that aside to look at what Vygotsky calls the natural history of the sign, and this in particular has to do with the pointing gesture, the pointing activity. This is a central part of the entire explanation as to how signs are created and how they enter, if you like, human activity and thinking. The idea is that, first of all, early forms of social contact and relationship with children are not mediated; they are direct, unmediated, and they are natural forms of social contact with analogues in animal behavior. But that at a higher level of development, mediated relations appear. And he says an essential characteristic of such relations is the sign by means of which social contact is established. Also goes on to say then, the quote in the middle, that this development of the emergence and the development of signs as part of mediated contact, which is essential to cultural development, passes through three basic stages that can be described in the following way, he says, using Hegel's analysis. So we're going to look at that a little bit. It's interesting that in the English translation, the Hegelian terminology is sometimes not been translated, which makes a bit of a problem for the English translation. And I would draw your attention in that light to the article I recommended by Maria Czechonadsky on individuation in Vygotsky, which her paper from 2017, which does focus on that point. As an example of this, Vygotsky is going to, says, look at the history of the development of the pointing gesture. As we shall see, he says, it plays an exceptionally important role in the development of speech in the child and is to a significant degree the ancient, meaning historic, basis for all higher forms of behavior. So there is a lot resting on this account, to say the least. So let's have a look. Initially, he says the pointing gesture represents a simply unsuccessful grasping movement directed toward an object and denoting, he says, that's the wrong word in the English, a future action. The child attempts to grasp an object that is somewhat too far away. His hands stretched toward the object are left hanging in the air. The fingers make pointing movements. This situation is the point of departure for further development. Here, the pointing movement, which we may arbitrarily term a pointing gesture, that's one passage where the Hegelian terminology has been left out. So this movement appears for the first time. Movement of the child objectively indicating, he says, an object and only an object. When the mother comes to help the child and recognizes his movement as pointing, the situation changes substantially. The pointing gesture becomes a gesture for others. In response to the unsuccessful grasping movement of the child, there arises a reaction not on the part of the object, but on the part of another person. In this way, others carry out the initial idea of the unsuccessful grasping movement. That is a terrible translation. My translation would be, thus it is others who bring meaning into the unsuccessful grasping movement. And those only subsequently, on the basis of the fact that the unsuccessful grasping movement is connected by the child with the whole objective situation, does he himself begin to regard this movement as a direction it should mean as indicating or pointing. So here the function of the movement, Here the function of the movement itself changes. From a movement directed toward an object, it becomes a movement directed toward another person by means of a connection. It should say it becomes a means of connection. Grasping is converted into a direction. It should mean into an indication or a pointing gesture. Because of this, the movement itself is reduced, contracted, and so on. That form of the pointing gesture is developed, which we may rightly call a gesture for oneself. So here we have the top of the Hegelian tree here. But movement becomes a gesture for oneself in no other way than being at first direction for oneself. That should say pointing in itself. That is objectively having all the necessary functions for direction and gesture for others. That is being thought of and understood by the people nearby as a direction. So it's because of the way that people think about what's going on and react to it in that situation that in effect makes it into a pointing gesture, which is then understood by the child, him or herself. In this way, he says, the child is the last one to recognize his gesture. Its significance and function are initially made up of an objective situation, and then by the people around the child. The pointing gesture most likely begins to indicate by movement what is understood by others, and only later becomes a direction or an indication for the child himself. Okay. Thus, we might say that through others, we become ourselves. And this rule refers not only to the individual as a whole, but also to the history of each separate function. That's the lesson that he's drawing from it. Okay. Through others, we become ourselves. This also comprises the essence of the process of cultural development expressed in a purely logical form. The individual becomes for himself what he is in himself through what he manifests for others. So that's the significance of the pointing gesture. I mean, it really can't be underestimated, it can't be overestimated as a principle. But what do we make of it? Whatever our attitude may be to the appeal to Hegel, and indeed to Marx, the bottom line, as Vygotsky himself says many times in his own work, the bottom line is it plausible? Does this account actually stand up to critical scrutiny? Is there evidence for it? Now, Vygotsky, in the text in question, doesn't cite any supporting research about pointing, the development of pointing, although he gives quite a graphic account of it. So it appears here as a kind of an abstract narrative. So I took the opportunity to just have a very brief look at some of the empirical research on pointing to see what kind of thing is being said in that research. And in particular, I looked at a book called Pointing, Where Language, Culture and Cognition Meet. This is from 2003, so it's a little bit old now. I'm sure colleagues may have something more up-to-date in mind. But I had a look at two articles in particular, where the Vygotskian account of pointing is explicitly examined, let's say. The first one by Nobuo Masatka is interesting. Here, Masatka notes that in 1912, Wilhelm Wundt noted in his massive Völkerpsychologie that pointing was nothing but an abbreviated grasp movement, which is kind of the line that Vygotsky is taking here. So it's possible that Vygotsky got this whole account from Wundt. I'm not sure, but at least that's plausible, I think. However, Masatka's own research into this area with very young children and his conclusions do not offer anything which appears to support Vygotsky's claim that pointing emerges. Sorry, I've missed the quote there. That pointing emerges from acts such as grasping and reaching, which bring desired objects to the infant. His research contradicts that account. And his view is as follows: index finger extension, in other words, pointing, is related to exploration and self-regulation of attention, and not to the infant's desire to bring the object to him or herself. In other words, index finger pointing emerges from a manual act related to exploration and self-regulation of attention. When infants develop the desire to share the exploration and attention intersubjectively, index finger extension develops into index finger pointing. Now, I'm not endorsing this view. I have no idea about the credibility of this research. To some extent, it might be seen to be a confirmation of aspects of the principle that Vygotsky is advancing, namely that children's actions are molded and shaped in and through their communicative interactions with adults. And there's no question about that. Nevertheless, Masatka is claiming that pointing has, in effect, a self-communicational origin and function for the child before it has this interpersonal function. And to put things in that way is to turn the Vygotskian argument upside down. If we look at the next, at another chapter in the book, which is George Butterfield's article called "Pointing is the Royal Road to Language for Babies," which seems to be a promising thing for Vygotsky, in fact. Butterworth takes the Vygotskian account head on. Vygotsky believed that pointing derives from unsuccessful grasping movements, which are interpreted by the mother as a request. In coming to her infant's aid, the mother converts the movement into a gesture for others, and it acquires an imperative character. This is kind of what he's saying. Anyway, let's assume that that's okay. But his own detailed research studies offer no support for this. He says these findings run against the view of the origins of pointing as theorized by Vygotsky, because pointing was not tied in any way to failed grasping, and there was no evidence that the imperative use of the gesture had primacy. Now, again, I'm not endorsing this view. And of course, Butterworth's research is as much open to critical interpretation as any research. Vygotsky might well have had an answer to this because he's coming at it from quite a different perspective. And there may well be other studies that support Vygotsky's account, and I don't know about that. But I think both of these studies, Masatka and Butterworth, do highlight to me what appear to be big holes or problems with Vygotsky's own account. First of all, of course, it is predicated on this very stark natural cultural divide. And that in turn, I think, leads to very striking asymmetries in how the roles and the semiological proficiencies and subjectivities of mother and child are addressed and presented in his account. The mother is able to understand, interpret, make sense of what the child is doing and intervene, and yet apparently the child isn't able to, or there are no explicit description of the child's interpretational, inferential, or any other abilities to make sense of anything, except when it comes perhaps to the key passage in the account, where I think the problem is raised at its most serious level. He says it's others who bring meaning into the unsuccessful grasping movement, and only subsequently, on the basis of the fact that the unsuccessful grasping movement is connected by the child with the whole objective situation, does he himself begin to regard this movement as a direction. Now, yeah, but that's kind of the big question, isn't it? How does the child connect the so-called unsuccessful grasping movement with the whole objective situation? I mean, that is simply left unanswered, but that's the big one. In other words, how is the child making sense of this? Well, that's not explained. And I think it's the semiological abilities, the interpretation abilities and subjectivity of the child, him or herself, in this interaction and in the history of the interaction with the mother, that's not there in this account by Vygotsky, but it is there, at least in some form, in the research of Butterworth and Masatka, who may have their other ideological problems, but they're not seeing all of this through this prism of natural cultural stimulus reaction and so on and so forth, and not trying to paint this particular view of pointing and so on. So I'll leave that with you to think about, but that's what I would draw attention to. I know my time is going, but I just wanted to say a little word finally about the command. Because if the pointing gesture is the basic rationale for this natural history of the sign, how do signs arise and have their place in child development, then the account of the verbal command is just as significant in the support and illustration of the genetic law itself, working to produce cultural will and voluntary action through the internalization of social forms of spoken interaction. How does Vygotsky situate this argument? Well, if we take the second quote on there, we can see that Vygotsky is drawing very, very much, not uncritically, but he's drawing on the work of Pierre Janet. And this is what he says. He says the history of the development of signs leads us to the general law that controls behavior. This in effect is the genetic law. Pierre Janet calls it the fundamental law of psychology. So you can see that the relationship between Vygotsky and Janet here is quite significant for us. The essence of the law is that in the process of development, the child begins to apply the same forms of behavior to himself that others initially applied to him. The child himself assimilates the social forms of behavior and transfers them to himself. Applying this to the area of interest to us, we might say that nowhere is the correctness of this law more clear than in the use of the sign. How so? Well, initially, he says, the sign is always a means of social connection, a means of affecting, influencing, or acting on others, and only later does it become a means of affecting oneself. And here then, Vygotsky refers to supporting evidence, including Piaget and Baldwin and so on. Let me skip that next quotation, but let me get to the real heart of the thing, which is, again, based on Janet. According to Janet, he says, the word was initially a command for others. Then it became a complex story. This is a terrible translation. It means it passed through a complex history, consisting of imitation, changes in function, etc., and only gradually was separated from action. So this is some strange kind of mythical view of the origins of human development that he's got from Janet. According to Janet, the word is always a command because it's a basic means of controlling behavior. For this reason, if we want to explain genetically from what the volitional function of the word is derived, why the word subordinates motor reaction, what the origin of the power of the word over behavior is in both ontogenesis and phylogenesis, we unavoidably arrive at the real function of command. Janet says the power of the word over mental functions is based on the real power of the superior over the subordinate. The relation of mental functions must be genetically attributed to real relations between people. Regulating another's behavior by means of the word leads gradually to the development of verbalized behavior of the individual himself. In other words, what Vygotsky is saying then is trying to explain the origin of voluntary, deliberate action via the internalization and self-direction of commanding words, or words behind which there is the relation of boss and subordinate. This actually became a cornerstone of the cultural historical theory, and I think has been significantly overlooked for its problematic assumptions and implications. But this is, for example, from Alexander Luria. So this is not something that I've made up. This is Luria, one of the co-creators of the cultural historical theory, and this is how he succinctly puts this principle in his much later book, Language and Cognition. He says, the ontogenesis of voluntary action begins with the practical act that the child performs in response to the command of an adult. Subsequently, he said, the child learns to speak and can begin to give spoken commands to himself or herself, at first externally in the form of overt speech, and then internally through inner speech. So, you know, unless Luria missed the memo, that view is fairly central to the formulations of the principles of cultural historical theory. So that is the centrality of the issue of the command, in other words, the internalization or reproduction of the individual of the role of the commanding role of words as the basis for voluntary behavior. In other words, you are giving commands to yourself, in effect, in carrying out a voluntary act. So, I'm sorry this has been so quick and there's so much to think about. But my own consideration and examination of all of this, without taking into account the later work, just having a look at this particular text in and its formulations, suggests a number of things. First of all, the obvious one is what happened to the genetic law? Did it survive Vygotsky's later rethinking of his psychological principles? Did it survive the work on meaning and sense? Does it survive the discussions of Perigevani and so on? What is the fate of this law? Does it still persist throughout that later work, or are there grounds for thinking that it was challenged or left behind? And if so, what is the principle then of cultural development if it's not this? Secondly, I think whatever problems or issues we may find with this law, it's incredibly compelling in many respects. It's very insightful. It's a powerful synthesis of a number of different things, obviously with a very powerful vision of how the social and the individual relate together through these communicational means. It's very powerful, and I'm sure that as you found, no doubt, my friends, in your own work, that it's also susceptible to development and adaptation in new political and intellectual contexts. I'm sure you've made of this a lot of it for your own purposes, and have rethought it and reconsidered it in particular ways that suit new contexts. As indeed Anna Stetsenko has. I mean, she's pays tribute to, obviously, to the Vygotskyan legacy in developing her own transformative activist stance. But I think that the problems with this, then, the problems that I see at this stage, although I'm still very undecided about a number of issues, that there is, nevertheless, the genetic law in Vygotsky's formulation very much rests on a foundation of responsiveness, of reaction, reactivity, as opposed to a primary principle of action and transformation. The natural, causally established reactivity of behavior is taken as the foundation of cultural activity. And there, I think, is a problem. I think there still is a problem in trying to get human activity, transformative activity, out of a situation in which there is a foundation of reactivity and responsiveness in Stetsenko's terms. And I think that contradiction shows up at many points in Vygotsky's theory, and certainly inclines it, I think, towards a theory of social order or social reproduction, rather than a theory of social transformation. And just as it is difficult, to say the least, to derive self-action from reaction, it's difficult to get a psychology and politics of action, of transformation, from a psychology of reaction, responsiveness and subordination. And secondly, I think the commitment to this responsiveness, in other words, the incorporation with qualifications of the Pavlovian naturalistic view of human reactivity as the foundation, I think sits very uncomfortably in the Marxian tradition, where the fundamental principle, in effect, of a dialectical theory is self-movement. self-movement of matter, self-action. Movement is not construed as some kind of causally determined response to something. It's the very principle itself of movement and self-movement, which is the foundation, I think, of any dialectical system, and particularly the Marxian one. And if that is the case, then instead of an initial foundation of reactivity and a principle of self-regulation in response to artificially created signs, what if we put that principle of self-movement, of transformation, of action rather than reaction, the principle of self-moving and self-transforming subjects collectively, a collective subject, self-moving and transforming and acting collectively? What if we put that principle at the foundation of any kind of psychological theory? And on that note, my friends, I will stop. Thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to your thoughts and questions. I'll stop sharing there if I can, I think. I don't know how to do that, but see if I can do it. Oops. Good, it's gone.
I cannot see any question in the chat.
Thank you, Peter.
My pleasure.
Yes, other questions? I think we can open the microphone and just ask Peter, or if you need translation, you can ask in Portuguese and then I translate it to Peter. Se tiver perguntas que queiram fazer em português, pessoal, podem fazer e eu traduzo aqui junto com o Peter, né, para as pessoas ficarem mais à vontade para perguntar.
Luiz está com a mão levantada, do.
Pode falar, fica à vontade.
Posso perguntar?
Sim.
Professor, bom dia, muito obrigado mais uma vez pela sua aula. Eu espero não estar sendo repetitivo, né, nas perguntas que eu fiz antes, né? Mas a sua discussão e a do Vygotsky sobre os dispositivos que criamos para o controle do comportamento próprio ou alheio é um dos elementos cruciais para a minha tese. Você deu o exemplo de contar até 3, mas também criamos o despertador, ou mais recentemente, o nosso despertador agora está dentro dos nossos smartphones. Na minha tese, eu coloco o Vygotsky para dialogar com as ciências cognitivas, que chamam esses dispositivos de mente estendida, embora essa definição seja mais limitada, né? Como eu devo ter comentado das outras vezes, né, eu vou estudar como, sobre o fetiche da mercadoria, a mente estendida vai se tornar o que eu chamo de máquinas automágicas, ou seja, um dispositivo que, ao mesmo tempo ou ao invés de ser usado por mim para o controle do meu próprio comportamento, ele serve também, ou principalmente, para que um agente oculto, geralmente um capitalista, controle o meu comportamento. Naquilo que o Robert Wiener, o pai da cibernética, projetou no seu livro, né, na frase "o uso humano de seres humanos". E aí, embora esse não seja o foco da minha pesquisa, isso talvez pode nos ajudar a compreender a disseminação da desinformação na internet e as consequências comportamentais extremas que a gente tem visto nas eleições brasileiras e em outros países. Vocês mesmos teriam passado pela influência da Cambridge Analytica no caso do Brexit. E aí eu termino aqui com uma frase do Boldirev e Herman Pilat, que quando eles discutem justamente a questão das pistas e dos signos, eles falam que é importante notar que esse papel dos signos para controlar o comportamento alheio não envolve necessariamente funções cognitivas de ordem superior, mas podem operar com base nos processos neuronais primordiais. Obrigado.
Thank you very much for that very interesting contribution. Yes, there are obvious connections and relationships between Vygotsky's work and those researchers in the area of extended mind, distributed cognition, and so on. And it's very interesting that you're working in that area. People like Andy Clark and others have used Vygotskyan research, as you know, in particular ways. And there are many things in that research which have a consonance with and a synergy with the notions in Vygotsky. And I'm very interested as well to hear that you're looking at this in the political field as well, in the field of general political social behavior as to how people can be influenced in that domain. All I would say is that the issue is, for me, is not so much about whether weather signs or other means that we create can be used to control behavior. I mean, everything that we can do can be used to control behavior. I mean, we put people in jail or execute them. I mean, these are some of the great ways we use to control people's behavior. Every aspect of things can be used to control behavior in that sense. Although, fortunately for the looking more optimistically at humanity, all means of control have so far failed, thankfully. Perhaps we can mention Lula again, I don't know in that context, but so far there are no means of control that have worked over to determine the fate, let's say, of humanity. But secondly, what I would say is that the problem with the Vygotskyan account is not so much this idea of controlling behavior. As you say, you set an alarm clock in the morning and you wake up to that alarm. What's not explained in Vygotsky is how you invented the alarm clock. It's the actual creative conscious capacity to create these things in the first place. That's the problem, and that's never explained in Vygotsky. In other words, he takes it as given because he's looking at child behavior ineffectively. He's looking at the children's behavior, taking it for granted in effect that the child is already in a society where, as he puts it, these things objectively exist. So that's the problem. But the question of how it could be the case that beings whose behavior was controlled by stimuli developed into creatures who could create whatever stimuli they like and forge their own historic path, that is not accounted for, I'm afraid. He does try to address that to some extent in this book, History of Development of Higher Psychological Functions. And his examples there, as you will know, are the knot in the handkerchief, casting lots to make decisions, and a third one, which I can't remember now. But these are so problematic, I think, in the way that they are treated. And I think I don't have the time to go into it, but I think a proper analysis of those examples that Vygotsky uses actually point to exactly the opposite conclusions that he draws. Namely, that such things like the knot, like the alarm, the alarm clock, like the throwing of dice and lots and so on and so forth. All of these things actually presuppose a social community, active, doing things. They presuppose, in effect, the creative capacity to do and make these things. They don't explain it. They actually really presuppose it. And I think that that's the problem in Vygotsky's account, because at the end of the day, if you start with this fundamental foundation of reactivity to stimuli, you can never coherently explain how creative human life, social life works, in my view. But I'm sure you have a different view. But thank you very much for your question and comment.
Professor, aproveitando o silêncio, você tem algum palpite sobre isso? Você tem alguma direção, alguma suspeita de como é que a gente pode explicar isso? Porque nas ciências cognitivas, é um assunto proibido, mas não se fala sobre isso. Mas qual é a sua suspeita? Como você poderia tentar explicar? Obrigado.
Yes, thank you very much for that. And that is an excellent point and an excellent question. I'm going to say a little bit more about that, I think, in the final seminar, where I try, perhaps hopelessly, to comment on that kind of question. But I think my abstract, let's say, response to that would be to say that we have to begin with, not end with, but we have to begin with self-action, self-transformation. Actually, that's what life is. And self-movement, self-action is always creative. It's always creative. Even if I want to move across the garden to the door, that is, first of all, it's an action of me, and that action changes the world and it changes me. The world and myself are transformed in that process. I'm creating something new every time I act, every time you act, every time we do something. This is creation. Moving from one point to another in space in order to get somewhere is a semiological creative act, because you have to understand how you're moving through space and adjust that to the obstacles, to the problems in the way, and create whatever you can to make sure you get there. So in fact, from the very start, the basic principle of all life and all our lives is that we are self-moving and self-acting beings. And self-movement and self-action is creative, inherently creative. So creativity is there right from the beginning. If we take self-movement and self-action, as we should, I think, in the dialectical tradition, if we take that as the basic principle, then I think we can start to make more sense of how, though, all of those creative capacities that humans develop, how that self-development of humanity is possible through this collective self-movement and transformation. So I hope to say a little bit more about that. And I know that's a very poor and abstract answer to your question, but that is, I think, where I would begin to look at it.
Acho que tem duas pessoas com a mão levantada, né? A Ia, se quiser.
Eu não sei se a Débora quer fazer a pergunta que ela colocou aqui, porque se for essa questão, eu só queria... Débora, você quer fazer a pergunta que você colocou aqui? Eu posso só fazer um comentário, então, que é do mesmo assunto que o Luiz acabou de falar? Então, eu na verdade... Oi, Peter. Eu quero, talvez seja uma coisa meio do senso comum. Não sei se é senso comum falar. Oi, hi. I'm very, very happy to be here and hearing you. O que eu vou falar é um pouco na linha, seguindo a fala do Luiz, mas tenho medo de ser uma fala meio ou do senso comum ou uma fala muito genérica política. Mas eu queria colocar para ver, tanto para o Luiz como para você, Peter, que eu acho assim que, para tentar pensar um pouco na linha do que o Luiz fala, ou seja, como que nós podemos enfrentar essa massa de informações, de fake news, esse modus operandi que destrói, não sei se destrói, mas que abafa a possibilidade do humano ser criativo, produzir ideias, enfim, ser crítico, né? E aí eu fico achando o seguinte, Luiz, que o que tem que... Uma primeira questão que tem que ter é exatamente o que o Peter colocou. Quer dizer, nós temos uma concepção de homem, temos que ter uma concepção de homem que entende este humano de uma maneira não dicotômica. Quer dizer, entende o humano como sendo objetivo e subjetivo ao mesmo tempo, né? Que entenda o humano como aquele que, ao objetivar a sua subjetividade, ele constrói esse mundo e, ao mesmo tempo que ele subjetiva a objetividade, ele também se constrói e constrói o mundo. A gente tem que entender o humano como único, singular e social ao mesmo tempo. Então, acho que se a gente entende isso, entende, então, a capacidade de criação, a capacidade de produzir, essa ideia que você trouxe hoje, Peter, que eu não conhecia, essa fala do Vygotsky, de que significação é criação dos signos. Então, eu acho que isso que a gente tem que entender. Para além disso, é uma questão de vontade política. Eu acredito assim, que nós teríamos que ter políticas públicas para a educação, para a saúde, enfim, que se pautassem nesta concepção de homem, que acreditassem nesse homem dessa maneira, mas não basta só acreditar no homem, que o homem tem essa potência. Teria que ser uma política pública que tivesse a intencionalidade de transformar a realidade social e que tivesse uma direção. Direção não é exatamente eu quero um regime igual da Rússia, de Cuba, não, mas que tivesse uma direção de emancipação humana e política, porque daí está no campo da política. Mas, assim, sem essa concepção do homem como um ser capaz de criar, criticar, e que ele não é também, ao mesmo tempo, não é natural isso nele, que isso é construído historicamente, esse é o ponto de partida. De resto, é um movimento político, são as políticas públicas que têm que ter essa visão de transformar a realidade para uma realidade de justiça social. Porque, senão, você pode usar toda essa criatividade humana para criar uma onda à la Hitler. Quem disse que essas pessoas não são criativas? Eles são criativos também. Os nazistas, os fascistas, eles, dentro do âmbito deles, eles estão criando. Mas eu acho que não basta falar em criatividade, a gente tem que falar em justiça social, né? Mas, enfim, eu fui na frente da Débora, só porque eu queria dar um palpite aí, que, como eu disse, pode ser meio do senso comum, ou de uma vontade política, né? Mas, enfim, obrigada.
Posso...
Sim, vai lá, Débora.
Posso falar? Agora estão me ouvindo bem?
Sim.
O meu campo, a minha área de estudo e pesquisa é a infância, né? Sou professora do Núcleo de Desenvolvimento Infantil, atuando com ensino, pesquisa e extensão, com bebês e crianças bem pequenas. E na área a gente tem falado muito, tem se usado muito esse termo também de protagonismo, né? Da curiosidade dos bebês, da curiosidade das crianças, de explorar o mundo, seu entorno. E aí eu incluo também as questões todas da linguagem, desde as primeiras expressões, vocalizações, evocações do bebê, né? conhecendo o seu entorno, conhecendo o mundo à sua volta, e do papel, qual é o papel, né? A função da professora. Esse protagonismo, ele também é dos adultos? Aproveitando a fala da professora que me antecedeu, falando da questão também dos recursos de pesquisa, nós tivemos muitos cortes, inclusive para as creches, o básico, né, a alimentação, né? Então eu me pergunto assim, das possibilidades que temos com a arte, com a literatura, com a música, com o movimento, né? Como que esse projeto, essa concepção de homem, também vai passar pela concepção de criança, de infância, de educação, desde a mais tenra idade, né? E no âmbito público, não, né, as políticas públicas todas voltadas para a educação de bebês e creches, também passa pela formação de professores, né, da possibilidade desse professor, além da formação inicial, ele seguir, né, os seus estudos, a sua formação continuada, né, mestrado, doutorado, especialização, cursos, tudo isso para instrumentalizá-lo. E aí a minha pergunta ali no chat foi nesse sentido, de protagonismo. Se tem falado muito esse termo protagonismo, mas o que é? O que seria esse protagonismo? Também compreendendo esses processos de criação, de imaginação, de complexificação das funções psicológicas superiores, né, da consciência. Como que esse processo vai se dando ao longo da vida, de complexificação da consciência, de leitura de mundo, do pensamento, de conseguir perceber, identificar o que são as questões que são trazidas para nós de fatos reais e o que é fake news, por exemplo, né? Então, a minha pergunta vai mais nesse sentido, de compreender um pouco mais, então, desse nosso papel como professora, atuando com crianças desde bebês, e nesse compromisso que nós temos, que é social, que é político também, atuando com os bebês, as crianças desde a mais tenra idade. Era essa a minha questão. Agradeço a oportunidade. Obrigada.
Yes, thank you very much indeed for that question and contribution. There's so much in there, and I applaud you for the passion that you're bringing to this subject and your inquiry into these very deep questions. And I thank Ia as well for her contribution previously to this. Because in the end, these are the questions that we're having to confront, aren't they, in our daily lives, in our professional lives, and in our political lives. And sometimes those three aspects seem to come together, and sometimes they don't seem to come together so closely. I think on the question of protagonists, I think you are right that we are all protagonists, aren't we? Sometimes we may not want to be, and we may not want to recognize it, but everything we do has an effect, has consequences for others. Not doing something has consequences as well as doing something. So we're all bound together in a billion ways in our life histories and in our search for a better life for ourselves and for future generations. So from that point of view, I can understand as a teacher that you want to be the very best that you can to enable that free development of children under your care. In a world where we are absolutely bombarded with nonsense, lies, propaganda, disinformation, and where many of our families and children are living in poverty, extreme poverty, without resources. This is the case even in the UK, where millions upon millions of children are undernourished. Millions of families have to choose between heating their homes and feeding their children. We're going through this so-called energy crisis, which of course is itself a lie. It's entirely manufactured by the great powers, by the Western powers in particular. And so we're facing these awful questions every day. But we are protagonists in that. And I think that what we do can make a difference in these different ways. I think we should also note that as the election in Brazil shows, you know, the people in power don't control history. They think they do, and they'd like to do, but they don't control it. They don't control the world. Look even at the war in Ukraine. Here, I'm not a supporter of the Russian invasion, but we know that the Western powers have used the occasion for their own strategic political goals. But all of those have gone very wrong, and Europe itself is now facing a serious recession because, in fact, the world doesn't go the way they want it to go, and there's also growing resistance within many European countries to the political regimes that think they do control it all and think they do have all the answers. Here in the UK, I think we're on our third prime minister in as many months because whatever they try to do or think they can do, there is the collective protagonist. Let's say we're part of a collective protagonist, and it's that collective protagonist of people who will, in the end, fight and resist what our rulers want of us. That power is actually unstoppable. That force is irresistible, and we are part of that. We are part of that, and that vision of an unstoppable power that they can try disinformation or whatever. The propaganda here in the UK is immense, but in the end it doesn't work. It doesn't work because it's the condition of people's lives and their aspirations and their collective strength and spirit that is the decisive factor, I think. And from that point of view, I think the work that we do as professionals, as teachers, as parents, as siblings, and so on, is all part of that attempt to reinforce, to knit together, to strengthen that collective protagonist, which is the real subject, I think, of history, and which can resist and fight at enormous cost, no doubt, but which can resist and fight all these things, because that's the real driving point, the driving force of history, whatever they try to tell us, I think. Of course, that's not much consolation at the moment, but I think that's a vision that stays with us, and I think helps us to put up with and to strengthen ourselves against all the bullshit that's happening, I think. So I thank you for those points.
Mais perguntas, pessoal? Gostaria de fazer para o Peter. Acho que não tem. Não sei se tem alguma coisa aqui no... Tem alguma coisa no... Será que no Facebook ou no YouTube, a Vivi?
Não tem. Não temos, Adolfo.
Não tem.
Adolfo, I would like to ask a question, if possible.
Sure.
Hello, Peter. My name is Christine Nicolaides, and I've been a professor for over 30 years in Brazil. But right now, So right now I'm in Florida, and I had started all over again. And I'm a high school teacher, which has been, quite an experience. As you probably know, Florida is a very conservative state, much more towards the right side. And there is something called parental right now that has been approved and passed by the Governor DeSantis, which says that nothing that has not been approved by the district can be taught in terms of content. And we're constantly observed by several people, just come in your classroom, which is something was so not used in Brazil. And so everything is controlled, and everybody, there's this constant fear that anything you say, you might use against you. So you probably heard about this. So my question is just maybe something to close this and to give us some, a word of hope. Do you think, and so we've seen that this happening not only in Florida, United States, but all over the world. What I'm afraid of is what is going to happen with these kids, that since we got our mouth shut, and our hands tied, what is going to happen? What kind of critical thinking can we actually develop with these kids if we're forbidden to talk about anything that is not there in the content, on the standards, on the cups, or whatever they call, okay? And would you give us, I think in a way you just said this in the question before, but would you give us some kind of hope, that there's still hope there, there's still a way for us to find, even if it's little things that we can do to avoid the big disaster that is going to come out of this new generation, that they only think about their little own word and this is, from my view, the interest of whoever is in charge right now, and it's their interest that we have a generation like this that doesn't really think outside of their box, and again, and brings down all the creativity that it's so important as you brought it today. Thank you. I hope my question, my words were, my thoughts were clear.
Yes, thank you. Very clear. And thank you for that. I think, first of all, that these attempts to control the curriculum and to control what teachers can and cannot say and do in the classroom, these are signs of a weakness on the part of those people who rule us. They appear as forms of domination and coercion, but they speak of a weakness and a vulnerability in the circles of power, and they know that. But secondly, I think I might have said this before in one of the other discussions, but I don't think that the decisive factor in the classroom is the curriculum as such, or the content of curriculum. I think it's you. It's how you in the classroom relate to those kids. I think that's the crucial thing, because you embody those values that you believe in, and the way you talk to kids, the way you organize classes, the encouragement that you give, the way that you are and the way that you relate to them, that actually shows to them in practice, in a person, these virtues of criticism, self-criticism, thinking, generosity, consideration, justice, fairness. All of those things are embodied in you, I think. And so even if certain things about what you can say or teach are banned or prescribed in the classroom, it's still the social relations in the classroom itself that I think are the driving spirit and the driving force for children's development. I remember when I was at school, certainly in secondary school, the one thing I remember, and the one thing that I've kept from my school days that's really meant something, is those teachers who treated us like human beings. It didn't really matter what the subject was, but because they opened themselves to us, you know, they treated us people. They encouraged dialogue. They encouraged self-criticism. You could have a talk to them. They organized things in particular ways. And because I was used to quite disciplinary methods at school, that was a liberating experience for me, and it made such a difference to my own personal development. And I would perhaps say, it's not a full answer to your question, but I think maybe the important things for kids, you know, from their point of view, is how the teacher treats them, you know, and what the teacher embodies, and they get inspiration from that, inspiration that lasts all their lives from that experience, and they take it with them, I think. And so maybe in the end, it's not so much what the curriculum content is, but the human values that you project because of who you are and the way you organize your relationships with the children in the classroom. I think that's a very, very essential point, I would say, in answer to your question, but I don't know whether you would think that.
Completely, I completely agree. Thank you, but thank you very much. I think we just, at this moment, we just need some encouragement, you know, right now. So that was perfect. Thank you. It's still worth it. It's still worth it.
Thank you. Anybody else? I think what Chris is saying in the US is what we are gonna see in the future in Brazil, I think, because I do a lot with private schools, and I see parents calling us to check the politics side of the teachers, to know what we are teaching in the classroom. I talked to a mom this week that she was looking for she was asking if we teach any kind of Bible stuff, if we had any evangelical or Catholic orientation in the school. And I tried to explain to her that our school is not religious oriented. But then she said that she watched a video from a pastor that was saying that kids should be studying in religious oriented schools and blah, blah, blah. So mainly in the area where I'm living right now, it's the Cruz Bandeirantes, with pretty much, I think, 99% of the population are white, right wing. But the schools around are reflecting this this kind of mentality of can I observe the class? Can I see the book? And can I check the curriculum? So which I think is pretty much what now is happening with you there, Chris. And here is not easy to, but yes, we need to find strength from somewhere to, as Peter said, embody in our lessons the justice and the democratic ideals that we believe, and try to make it work. It's not an easy task. Anybody else? Any questions? Peter, thank you a lot. It's always very inspiring to be here this Thursdays. So I invite you all for our last meeting on the 8th of December. And hope you guys have a nice day and nice weekend. And I think that's it. Thank you very much. Thank you, Peter.
Well, Adolfo, thank you very much for
Thank
chairing this session so well. That's been excellent. Thank you so much, my friends, for being here today. Thank you to our wonderful interpreters who have done such a brilliant job today with it all. And I look forward to the next one.
Yeah.
Please keep safe and take care.
Tchau,
All the very best.
Peter. Tchau para todo mundo.